The last few hours in the life of Paul Trent had been more stirring and exciting than any he had ever known. And there came now to both father and daughter one of the queerest sensations they had ever known, when, from the raised footpath under the great Tith barn, they actually encountered those rushing waters. The first sight of that brownish flood, flecked with foam that had ceased to be foam, foam that had become a whitish scum, tangled with every sort of floating refuse, was something that no one who saw it could forget until the day of his death. More dramatic sights, more tragic sights might follow, and did follow for both Bloody Johnny and his daughter that day, but it was the first impression of the power of the waters that sank into the girl's mind and returned to her afterwards, again and again, to the last hour of her consciousness. The things that she saw floating upon the torrid flood were what lodged themselves most in Crummie's mind. Dead puppies, dead kittens, dead chickens, children's dolls, children's toys, bits of broken furniture, pieces of furniture that were not broken but were upside down and horribly disfigured. Such were some of the objects she caught sight of as they stood on that stone-flagged curb with the flooding swirling at their feet. She saw towel horses and laundry baskets. She saw wicker cradles and pitiful wooden chairs with their legs in the air. And these were only a few of the intimate utensils of human life that were exposed in that primeval indecency to the eye of the onlooker as the eddying torrent whirled them forward. Fire is the great devourer, but it is so swift and deadly with its blinding flames and suffocating smoke that it spreads a kind of vacuum around it, a psychic vacuum created by the annihilating suction of the Heraclean force, which is the beginning and the end of all life. Water, on the other hand, except in the wildest tempest at sea, kills more calmly, paralyzes more slowly, and the terror that it creates does not shrivel up the normal nerves of our human awareness. For this very reason, the slow ghastliness of death by water seems more natural to humanity than the swift horror of death by fire. It was a quaint example of the obstinate self-assertion of human beings that now, as they were waiting there, Paul Trent took upon himself to point out that a flood was the sort of occasion when governments and states showed what frauds they were. Well, we can look at Katrina for that, huh? "There'll be a boat this way in a minute," he said, "but it'll be rowed by private people, not the soldiers." The lawyer's teeth chattering and shivering had ceased after that deep drink from the mayor's flask. "It's like Venice. It's like waiting for a gondola," he chuckled with a leer. Bloody Johnny's bare head was bent forward a little as he fronted the rushing, swirling torrent at his feet, but his eyes were turned westward in the deep sockets and were staring intently at the corner of Silver Street, round which the expected boat seemed most likely to appear. Crummie stooped down and turned up several times the bottoms of her father's black trousers, revealing his loose, bedraggled bootlaces. "There's a boat! There's two of 'em!" cried Mr. Geard. Two boats did indeed now appear, shooting round the corner of Silver Street with a great deal of splashing and shouting. Both were rowed, in spite of the anarchist's prediction, by a soldier. But in one of them was a large and huddled group of sobbing children, while in the other, a much bigger boat, save for the figure of Lily and Louis Rogers, clinging tightly to each other in the stern, there was nobody at all. The young soldier, who was rowing the large boat, was evidently totally unused to handling oars, and it was in his clumsiness angrily rebuked by the old men in the crowded boat. That produced the splashing and confusion. Every time his oars slipped, or got caught between the rushing waters and the wooden rowlock, Lily would turn on a peeling glance, like the gaze of a Christian martyr in an early Victorian print, towards the older soldier, whom the helpless oarsman seemed to be addressing as corporal. "Take the lady aboard, Bill," now commanded the corporal. "Take the two gents as well. Blimey! Do ye think ye gone to do nothing but row, young ladies? Do ye think the ye're in Weymouth by, or a Saturday afternoon? Take the three of them aboard at once. Pull with your other oar, you bleeding bibe. The other one, you price fool, the other one. God damn yer! You'll break your oars to bits in a jiffy. Stand up, you fool! Stand up and pull it out of a bloody water. God almighty! Was there ever such a ninny born of man's early seed?" The martyrized glance of Lily, lovely in her pallor, seemed to increase the bewilderment of the hapless young soldier even more than the abuse of his corporal. 3 times the great big canal boat from Bridgewater was carried by the flood past the place where the three stood. At the 4th attempt, when it looked as if the corporal, purple with rage, would soon be upsetting his own load of now screaming children, Paul Trent, wading up to his knees at the brown flood, clambered into the boat. "What have you done with your mistress?" he threw out hurriedly to the sisters Rogers as he regained his balance. "Miss Drew couldn't leave her things, sir," murmured Lily faintly. Once inside the unwieldy craft, for there were other oars under the seats, the lawyer had no difficulty in bringing it so close to their vantage ground that both father and daughter could clamber in without entering the water. Both Mr. Garrett and Crummy were staggered at the sight that awaited them when the keel of the boat grounded at last to the trodden mud at the foot of Wirral Hill. All Glastonbury seemed to have taken refuge on this eminence, and there were terrific hummings and drownings from the air and frantic screams from the hillside, and wild contradictory cries from both above and below, as several private airplanes and a couple of capacious military aircraft landed and restarted again in a roped-off enclosure. In facet, the whole of a southern portion of Wirral Hill had been by the time taken over by the authorities, and it was perhaps the best distraction that the terrified children of Glastonbury could possibly have had, the thrill of watching these constant landings and departures and seeing so many soldiers. Army tents had already been put up in sackcloth shelters, and the whole hillside was a tumultuous scene of confusion. Parents, with convulsed faces and distracted wits, were rushing about looking for children they had lost, and a wildly struggling crowd kept fighting to get to the flood's edge at the arrival of every boatload that reached the hill from the submerged portions of the town. It was the aged town clerk, struggling among the crowd at the water's edge, who was the messenger sent by Mr. Garrett to bring them to the tent the officials had set apart for her. And Crummy was so caught up out of herself by the wild scene before her that she kissed the old gentleman when he turned to her from some altercation that he was having with the small boy. "What's that?" she asked, noticing in Mr. Bishop's hand a curiously bound book that looked as if it had been floating in the flood for several hours. "A boy here picked it out of the water," replied the old man gravely. "It's about pardoning sin, but I've lost my glasses." As Bloody Johnny stepped from the boat upon the slope of Wirral Hill, he first glanced back at the level expanse of brown water, and then turned and surveyed the singular scene of shocking disorder and scrambling confusion which that familiar grassy eminence offered to his view. It was indeed a unique spectacle. Its movements and agitation carried an aura completely different from anything he had ever seen. It was not like a fair at Yeovil. It was not like a military field day at Dorchester. It was not like a scene on Weymouth Beach. On the other hand, it was not like a refuge camp in war, famine, or pestilence. A certain minority of the young people there, especially lads between 17 and 20, whose relatives were in no danger, were evidently hugely enjoying the excitement. But the queer thing was that everyone seemed to carry some flood mark about them. Their clothes were wet, or they were mud-stained, or some particular article of attire was missing. They would have resembled the inhabitants of a town escaping from a bombardment, save that the fear of water, the flood panic, evokes an utterly different atmosphere from the fear of bursting shells or exploding bombs. A flood panic is a steady and continuous presence, lacking the expectancy of anything crashing or deafening. A flood panic is essentially a silent thing, and in the respect has nothing of the wild distraction of a shipwreck, or of an ocean storm, or of a mob riot. Out of the way there, please. 2 men were lifting a woman's body from a boat to the land. The mayor recognized Dr. Fell as one of them, and he laid his hands on his arm. The doctors greeted him and addressed by name the man at the dead woman's feet. "Stop a bit, Dickory. It's Mr. Girard." No one knew better than Dickory Cantle who it was, but he was so dazed and stupefied that all he could do was to tighten his hold upon the ankles of his burden, as if Mr. Girard were a body snatcher. "I've been trying to revive her for an hour, Girard," went on Dr. Fell, "but it's no use. She's out of it. God, I wish I were." But Bloody Johnny did not hear him. If he had said, "I've decided to take those tablets tonight and end the whole thing," the mayor would have not heard him. The mayor's attention was riveted upon the body in their arms, which was of extraordinary beauty, though a bloody scar from a recent fall crossed her forehead. "Who is she?" asked Girard. "I don't know her. She has a lovely face. Who is she?" "She's Jenny Morgan. She's the mother of that little girl Nellie. She's the woman Red Robinson wrote about in the Gazette till you stopped in. She was Mr. Crow's girl at one time." "Is the child drowned too?" The doctor shook his head. "The poor creature wouldn't have been drowned if she hadn't been practically dead drunk. She was fishing things out of the water at the end of Dye House Lane. Her little girl was with her." "Where is the child now?" As he asked this question, Mr. Girard noticed that some small insect, a monad beetle or fly it was, with tiny yellow stripes, was moving gingerly across the dead girl's face, just as it would have done over leaf or stone. He flicked it off with his fingernail. That she couldn't feel that small tickling seemed stranger than that she couldn't open her big eyes. "The child's with Comrade Robinson and his wife," replied the doctor. "Nellie knows those two very well, better than she ever knew this beautiful creature, I expect. Well, you died the easiest death, my dear, that anyone could die, just as easy as—" Dr. Fell's mind wandered off from that calm face, where the dark fringed eyelids were covering those eyes that had always seemed too wide, as if they were forever seeing the things that normal people dodge, and he was thinking in his heart, "It's funny, but I believe I've got a real idea while I've been holding this girl. Why don't I just simply leave Bibby in that house and take lodgings with that chap Dickory? Dave Spear lives there, and why shouldn't I? I could keep my clinic." Well, we'll leave it at that, huh? I'll read the next paragraph. As he thought of this, and imagined the triumphant way in which he could lock up his consulting room in Master House Road every time he left it, Manor House Road, he suddenly caught upon Mr. Girard's face the most extraordinary expression he had ever seen on the countenance of any human being. Bloody Johnny had raised his hand again to the dead woman, this time to rearrange a fold of her dress, while her rescuers in their attempt to save her life had disarranged. But no sooner had his hand encountered that ice-cold exposed bosom than he left it there, lying like a heavy horse mushroom on the girl's breast. And with his hand resting there, his face took upon itself the very expression of this dead woman. His eyes closed. His jaw fell open. His nostrils grew pinched and thin. Certain lines disappeared from his face altogether, and certain completely new ones showed themselves. Now I'll stop for now. About 20 pages to go or so. And then it's another book. Oh, I'm not giving up yet. Oh, no. I got plenty of really long books to read. Till next time, see you in Glastonbury. Cheers.